Tom, whose life seemed filled with joy and fun until his hidden fears and dark secrets surfaced. At the center of his narrative is his marriage to Penny, which was on the brink of collapse. But this is not just a story of relationship breakdown, it's a tale of self-discovery, redemption, and attempts to rebuild what was shattered. Imagine his inner turmoil as he realizes he has lost what he truly cherished and strives to find happiness anew. It's a story of how our actions can have far-reaching consequences, and how we can learn lessons from our mistakes. Let's dive into this gripping tale and try to understand the price we pay for our decisions, and how we can find a path to healing and a fresh start. I was sitting at the bar of the Holiday Inn in Eindhoven, Holland. It was about 9 o'clock or 9:30 on a Thursday evening in November, and I had just come out of the restaurant and was sipping my beer, watching the world go by. A guy came and sat on the next bar stool. I glanced his way. He looked like the average traveling businessman, more handsome than many, I had to admit. I would guess he was a couple of years younger than me and probably an inch taller, which would make him around 32 or 33 and 6'1". The really sickening thing was that he was not only about 50 pounds lighter than me, but he was one of those slim, loose-limbed individuals who could wear rags and make them look Savile Row. I used to be like that once, but in the last few years I've spent too many evenings in the bar, too many beers on those evenings, and too much fast food when I needed to eat, so I wasn't loose-limbed and graceful anymore. I went back to staring at my beer, wondering if I was brave enough to tell my boss exactly what he could do with his job when I gave him my trip report on Monday morning, and whether giving up this job would be the first step toward building a new life that I so desperately needed. Dominic Taylor, that was the name she'd said. That was the name of the man she was about to marry. That was the name of the man who had dashed any hopes I had for happiness. But then my neighbor caught my ear. "I'll have a beer this evening," he said cheerfully to the barman. The barman smiled and he drew a glass of amber liquid and placed it in front of my neighbor. "You want it on your room tab, sir?" "Why not?" said my neighbor. He turned to me. "You are regular then?" "I've been every other week for the last 2 months, but this is my last week." "How about you?" "I haven't seen you in a year before." "No, I usually stay in the Crown. I have done for one night every 4 months for 8 years, so I thought I'd stay here just for a change," I replied. He smiled at my acknowledgement of his little joke. One night every 4 months for 8 years, it sounds as if the change was long overdue. "What do you do that brings you here on that sort of routine?" "My name's Nick, by the way," and he held out his hand. I shook his hand. "Thomas," I introduced myself. We both sipped our beers and then I answered his question. "Street furniture. I work for a manufacturer of street furniture, lampposts, traffic signs, traffic lights, you name it. It's a pretty basic commodity and the orders are fairly steady, but every now and then there is a big project. We have to look after our clients, who are usually local councils and road contractors, and my patch is Holland, Germany, that's the big one, and Belgium. So once a month I come over from London for a week. The first month it's North Germany, next month it's Holland, then back for South Germany, and then Belgium in the 4th month. And I'm back to the cycle with North Germany after that. One day in a big city, part schmoozing, part telling them what we've got coming up and checking on their thinking, and the next day on to the next city. Today it was Breda, and tomorrow it will be here in Eindhoven. What about you?" "I'm in computers. I've been installing a system here, but the client has accepted it, all the training is done, so my job's finished and it's over to the maintenance and client support people for Monday." He paused and looked at me. "I've only been doing it for a couple of months. I don't think I could do it for 8 years. I guess you enjoy it." I smiled and shook my head. "I used to, but I think I've just about reached the end of the road." I drained my glass and pushed it forward as Dump took it. I glanced around at my new friend. He was staring at a pretty blonde girl, about 25, who was sitting reading a paperback in the corner. I knew what he was thinking. There was a time in my life when I'd have been thinking it too. I turned back as Dump delivered my new glass of beer. He looked at Nick and noted where Nick was staring, then glanced at me with a knowing look. "And another one for you, sir," he asked crisply, demanding that Nick take his eye off the girl. "Oh yes, please, Dump," and Nick turned to me. I smiled ruefully. I should never have started accepting this job, it was the biggest mistake of my life. But I thoroughly enjoyed it for the first 5 years. Once a month I had a week away from home, good hotels and traveling on expenses, the taste of another life, great. For the last 3 years, I just haven't had the willpower to actually quit. Nick was still surreptitiously glancing at the girl. Dump returned and stood square at the bar, looking at Nick. Are they giving you a leaving party tomorrow, sir, or are you sneaking away back to your girl after last weekend? You two must have plenty to plan and talk about. Nick turned and looked at Dump, then smiled sheepishly. I think it's my big weekend last week that might be making me want to forget about it for a couple of hours tonight. I didn't understand this conversation, but I could hazard a guess, and it was obvious that Dump didn't want Nick to stray tonight. Dump looked at me and there was urgent desperation in his eyes. Why don't you tell him your story of traveling, sir? Then he turned back to Nick. You should listen to this tale. I can recommend it. Nick looked at Dump and then at me. I thought this was your first night here. Do you know Dump from somewhere? I said sure. Nick sat back on his stool. He sipped his beer and then looked at me. Okay, so what's the story? I sipped my beer and wondered if I was meant to make something up to put him off chatting up girls in bars. But actually, my true story might work and at least keep his attention long enough for the temptation to go up to her room or for her boyfriend to arrive or something. I turned to Nick and smiled. My story is returning from a trip like this 3 years ago, only it was from Belgium and it was in September. I was 33 years old. I had been married about 7 years by then to the most beautiful, intelligent girl in the world. I adored her. I paused and smiled, thinking of Penny, and took another sip of beer. I'd had a pretty good bachelorhood, quite a few notches on my bedpost, and then I'd met the girl of my dreams. And God, had I fallen. She was my one and only true love. She still is, I guess. And by luck, she'd fallen in love with me. We had a really wonderful 7 years. 2 years into it, I'd been promoted to this job and I was traveling 1 week every month on expenses and I was loving it. Everything in my garden was rosy. I was earning good money, so was she. We were agreed that we'd move soon from our apartment. It was a nice place right in the center of Winchester, if you know Winchester. Nick nodded his head in some vague acknowledgement that he had at least heard of the place. Anyway, she was 21 when I married her and I was 26, and it was the right time for me to settle down. So I was 33 when my story took place. So what happened? Well, I've told you how much I liked doing this job in those early years, but there was a time when I really wondered if I should give it up. I knew that Penny, my wife, seemed to be having some worries or doubts about it, but as I say, I was enjoying it. So I told her that I loved her, that she was the only girl for me, and that she had absolutely no need to worry about me, and she had absolutely no reason to doubt me. I reminded her that we needed the money, and that I enjoyed the job and the career opportunity. I paused to look at Nick. I guess she had been a bit nervous and stressed about it all for a couple of months, and maybe I wasn't sensitive enough to her needs and whatever she was thinking. Nick smiled reassuringly. What man ever knows what a woman is thinking? I smiled. Well, on the fateful night I got a good flight for once and we landed a bit early. Everything went perfectly. I came out of the terminal and for once there was a car-parked bus waiting. My car was actually in the bay next to the bus stop. I even got a clear run home, which was unheard of on a Friday night, so I guess I was probably home just a bit early, about 9 o'clock in the evening. And guess what? There was a BMW on my drive that I didn't recognize. Husband comes home early and you can guess what I found. Did you actually see them in bed? I can't think of anything much worse. No, thank God. I was at least spared that. As I came in through the front door, they were in the hall. She was completely naked, he was dressed, and they were just having their farewell kiss. My stomach heaved at the sight. Nick was still watching the girl and he began to stand. I looked around at Dunk, who was heading our way in desperation. I actually put my hand up on his shoulder and gently pushed Nick back down on his seat and said, "You should hear this, it gets better. Before you do anything, let me tell you, I know what it feels like to be betrayed by the one you love, and it is the most gut-wrenching pain anyone could ever feel. If you've got a girl back home, then think twice. Let me buy you another beer or whiskey if you like." Nick sat back defeated. Just another beer. I waited for our beers, just buying time really. When they were served, I started. Let me tell it as best I can remember in our actual words. Loverboy glanced around as I came through the door and said, "I knew we shouldn't have had that third time. Sorry babe, got to fly," and he did, straight out of the open front door. I'd like to say I had the presence of mind to or something, but I didn't. I hardly saw him leave, all I could look at was my darling wife. She stood there, a total mess, the image of a well woman. She sort of cringed before me, tears welling up in her eyes and her lips quivering. I just stared at her, no words seemed to come. She found herself before I recovered. She just quietly said, "I'm sorry, Tom," and turned and walked upstairs. I don't know how long I just stood there, leaning against the wall, but eventually I found my way to the kitchen and a glass of water. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Penny came down and found me. She had obviously showered and was now dressed. "I'm sorry, Tom. For all the world I wish. I wish you hadn't had to see that. I wish today wasn't happening. I really do. I'm sorry." She came and knelt at my side. I looked at her. "I loved you, Penny. I loved you with all my heart, and you betrayed me. You betray us. How could you?" "Why, Penny? Why now?" She was crying. "Oh, I've asked why so many times, but what's wrong with me? I don't know, Tom. I don't know. I wish I did." She crumpled and collapsed downward in defeat. As she crumpled downwards, I felt my anger rise upwards. You crap. How could you? I loved you, you were my life, and I come home to this. You immoral little. And as suddenly as the anger came, now tears took over. I sat there on the kitchen chair, sobbing like a baby. Everything was lost. There is no way back. I couldn't accept her screwing around on me. I loved her, but she had to be all mine or not at all. Eventually I calmed down and looked at my once loving wife. I thought we were happy. I thought we were on course, a couple of years of you still working, getting our finances right, and then children. I paused. Thank God we never got as far as actually having kids. I wouldn't want kids with you, not now. No child of mine will have a crap like you for a mother. Penny looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Tom. Oh God, you have no idea how much I loved you, what I've been through these past few weeks, finding that I need a guy like James. I really am so sorry." "Sorry for what? Sorry you were caught? Sorry for cheating all over our marriage? Sorry for declaring to the world that my love was not enough? What are you sorry for, Penny?" I paused and then added in bitter defeat. "You're not sorry for any of it." Her blue eyes, the eyes that once had told me that I'd found the love of my life, looked at me, searching my face and filled with tears. Suddenly a thought struck me. How long has this been going on? There's been a change in you for the last 3 months, maybe more. I tried to ignore it, to just make you feel safe and loved. I thought that was all I had to do because our love, our marriage was so strong. I never actually doubted you. God, what a fool I've been. It was you, slowly and carefully ruining everything we ever had, wasn't it? You and lover boy. What's his name, Penny, and how long? I told you his name, that was James. You saw, but I only met him on Wednesday. Let's talk, Tom, we need to be honest with each other and talk. Let me at least try to help you understand. She'd only known him since Wednesday, and then on Friday he sleeps with her in a triple marathon. I've only done it with her 3 times in one day, about 10 times in 7 years. And if she's only known him since Wednesday, how many others have there been in the last 3 months while I've been the loving and supporting husband, giving her reassurance of my love and commitment whenever I thought she needed it? I stood up. Talk. What about how you need more than me? How he's a better lover than me? What are we going to talk about, Penny? What's the motion for debate on nights like this? The pain and hurt of adultery? The lack of respect? The female ego that sex and love are different things? What shall we talk about, Penny? You tell me. There was an empty silence between us, which eventually I filled. I assume you had your little fest in our bedroom, in our bed, so I'll be in the guest room. I'm certainly not sleeping in what used to be our bed ever again. Please, Tom, please let me come to you. It needn't make any difference between us. I can still make you feel loved and wanted. It'll be good, I promise. Let's at least try to put it together. Let's give ourselves and our marriage a chance. Let's accept who we are and what we've done and build a new life. Please, Tom. It isn't meant to end like this. I don't want this, and I hope you don't. I stood and walked out.
You must be joking. I went into the dining room, where there was a decanter of my best whiskey and a glass. As I came out carrying them and walking towards the stairs, Penny came out of the kitchen and just stood and watched me. I looked at her with disgust. Why, Penny? Why wasn't I good enough for you? And I went upstairs to the guest suite. I took a sip of my beer and looked at Nick. He looked upset. What happened to her? Was it some mental breakdown? Why would a good and loving woman suddenly turn into some sick? Did you stay and get her help or just walk out? I wouldn't blame you for just walking away. I smiled. All I did that night was go to the guest room with my whiskey and sit on the bed and drink. It's not a good solution, and actually it doesn't work. I must have drunk the best part of 3/4 of a bottle. If I tried doing that tonight, I'd be passed out and on the floor long before I got that far. But that night, I sat there and it was like water. It certainly didn't block out the thoughts, the questions, the images of my beautiful Penny with other men. You know, until that moment that night, I'd never imagined my wife with any other man. She loved me. She'd given herself to me. She pledged herself to me in church for God's sake. Suddenly, she was sharing herself with others. She wasn't all mine anymore. She wasn't the girl I loved and wanted to grow old with. I turned and looked at him. Nick, isn't it? He nodded. Well, Nick, if you take anything from my story, take this. Don't ever make anyone feel what I felt that night. No one deserves to go through what I went through that night. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up at about 11 o'clock the next morning. I continued. So, what happened? Nick asked. I smiled that I now had his attention. He was sitting, listening. Well, I came out of the guest suite after drinking about 3 glasses of water. I sort of stumbled into the kitchen, and there she was, the messed up your life forever wife. She didn't say anything, but she poured me a mug of coffee. As I took it and sipped, that first sip made my stomach heave. She said, I'm sorry, Tom. We do have to talk. I've learned a lot about myself in the last few months, and not all of it is very nice. Nothing seems to be what I thought, but we do have lives to live. The world hasn't come to an end for either of us. I think I just looked at her just like the night before. She crouched at my side. We need to talk, but you aren't fit for that yet. She paused to check that I was listening to her. Look, I'm going to Mom and Dad's. I need to tell them some of where we are. I may need them in the coming weeks. Why don't you get some more rest and some food inside of you, and a shower and change of clothes while I'm gone? I'll be back at about 8 o'clock this evening, and we can talk then. She stood up and was gone. I smiled at Nick. At that moment, I thought she was the most cold-hearted bitch I could ever think of. She's just screwed up our marriage, and now she's off around to Mommy and Daddy's for said lunch, and to book her old bedroom just in case she needs it. And at that moment, I was thinking that she would most definitely need it. I went back to bed and just slept for about 4 hours. Then I got up and showered and I did feel better. A breath of fresh air and something to eat seemed to be calling. I paused and looked at him half smiling. Then I asked, do you know that a 1/4 pounder, large fries and a Coke can actually taste good? Well, it does if it's the day after your wife has washed your loving marriage into the history books. Nick smiled and added, the age of miracles has not passed. I continued. I remember sitting at that table in that burger joint, and suddenly the enormity of facing the end of my marriage hit me. Suddenly I didn't know what to think. I didn't know whether to walk out or stay and fight for some reconciliation. After that I just walked. Don't ask me where, just the streets. I had my head down and I was just thinking, I'm not some plastered saint. I told you I'd had a pretty good time before I was married. I looked around at the blonde and I saw you. You were fancying your luck there tonight. Being wanted by someone feels good. Sex feels good. But I thought that Penny was mine, all mine. Nick looked a little sheepish. I know I shouldn't. I've got a fabulous girl at home, my Polly. You had Penny, got Polly. I've known her for about 6 months and last Saturday, I proposed and she said yes. I think a week away by myself has made me a bit nervous. I know I love her so much, but it's an awfully big commitment. I was thinking maybe just one last time. He paused and looked around at me. So what happened when she got home? I had been sitting in my chair for the last hour, waiting to hear her come home, and promising myself that I'd remain in control. If anything, I wanted to enjoy what may be the last few moments of our marriage. I wanted her to see how she had betrayed us, how she destroyed a great love. Let her know that she was losing a great husband. Let her feel some of the pain that I feel. I wanted at least some moral victory out of this mess. And then I heard the front door open, and a minute later, Penny was sitting opposite me on the sofa. Tom, before we start, I want a promise from you. I'll tell you the truth, the absolute truth about me, and about what I've discovered about myself and our marriage in the last few months, but you must be honest with me. I don't want you to say things just to protect my feelings. I know you're hurt and shocked. I know we are probably at the end. I still cling to hope that somehow we can build something out of this, something that accepts the new me and what I've experienced in these last few weeks. And with honesty and the right commitment, maybe we can build something new and better. But I know you are very hurt and think it's all my fault. But promise me you'll tell the truth of how you feel about all that's happened, and all that's been said and done. Please. I nodded. So where do you want to start? You can ask me anything you like, Tom. I felt myself close to tears and swallowed them back. I didn't want to cry. I wanted her to cry. I guess I want to know who, for how long, and why, Penny. Why? Well, you've already said that you've noticed that something was wrong for the last few months. Well, I guess that's about right for the time when I've been doing something actively. But under the surface, it's been going on a lot longer than that. Only I didn't really know it. I didn't recognize it for what it was. I've been living a lie for years. She looked straight into my eyes. I haven't been truthful with you, Tom. Not about me, about my life, about some of the things I've found out about me. There have been too many lies, Tom. James was just the end of the line.
I told you I only met him for the first time on Wednesday. Where did you meet him? At work. Where? She smiled. Would you believe on the internet? He had a personal advert up and I contacted him. I thought he looked the right type. I could feel my anger and shock rise. You approached him because you thought he looked the right type? What looked right to you? The size of his. No, he was the right age. He said he was a struggling actor and he was up for escort work. Now I was losing it. Escort. He's for money and you were willing to pay him? Yes, but I didn't pay him to me. Oh no. What does he do? She sat back on the sofa. I could see that something had changed. Then she asked, tell me, Tom, when was the last time you got back from one of your trips when you haven't some girl you picked up somewhere? I was shocked. Where did that come from? What are you talking about? I paused, my mind running over a myriad of possibilities. Is that what this is all about? Is that why you've decided to turn yourself into a crap? You think I've been playing around on you when I'm away? I paused to look at her, let her read my eyes. I promised you, Penny, I have never ever been unfaithful to you in our marriage. Not for a single moment of our 7 years. I sat back, satisfied with myself that for the umpteenth time I'd reassured her on that silly idea. I know for the last few months you have been insecure. I guess that's natural with a husband that travels. But I've told you how much I love you, how much I need you, and how no other girl could come close to you for me. I've never strayed, and in the last few weeks when you've seemed so uptight, so nervous, I've told you that even more often than usual because I wanted you to know just how I idolize you, and you seem to be needing some extra security. Please don't tell me that you think I could ever betray you. I paused before I added, bitterly and angrily, but you decided to play around despite how much our marriage means to me. I paused. I knew we were at the end. I want a divorce, Penny. I want out of here. It was just sex. Tom James didn't mean anything. Have you any idea how much I loved you or even how much I love you right now? It doesn't matter whether I played James or anyone else. That wasn't about us. You were away and so maybe I got some sex. Well, it wasn't about our marriage, our love. I didn't get love. I didn't betray us. It was just sex, you crap. It was just sex. They didn't mean anything. Don't our wedding vows mean anything to you? There's no such thing as just sex. Sex means you are sharing your time, your body, and your emotions with someone else. I mean it, Penny. I want a divorce. There was a long pause and I saw her shoulders drop. Okay, Tom, you win. Have it your way. And she did have tears running down her cheeks. She was broken at last and I had my victory. I guess it's inevitable we are at the end, she said quietly. There was a silence between us as we absorbed the enormity of where we were. Penny was wiping her eyes and blowing her nose. You should know, Tom, I paid James for his acting ability. Her voice was strangely cold and calm. I didn't sleep with him. Not once. I kissed him. I had to. It was part of the scene. We'd sat here on the sofa, waiting to hear your car. I was embarrassingly neat, but that was necessary as well. But when we heard you, we got ourselves into position for you to come through the door and find us. She turned to me. Her eyes were blazing. I wanted revenge. I wanted you to have just one day of what I've been suffering for the last few months. It hurts, doesn't it, Tom, to think that your loving spouse is sharing their body, their love and intimacy with some stranger, that they have so little respect for you and so little need of your love. Her hand went behind the cushion, and suddenly there was a photograph in front of me. Lizzie. The Golden Tulip Hotel, Austin, on Tuesday. She pushed another photograph in front of me. Sarah and you in the bar of the Marriott in Gent on Thursday, just 2 days ago, Tom. And then another, Stuttgart last month. This was Gabrielle, who you met at reception on holiday. And on the Wednesday of your week in Germany, you took her to the local Chinese before you took her back to Rome for 12 for the night. She threw another 3 photos at me. Some other reminders of you being totally faithful to me from Germany and Holland. If you want actual reminders of their names or the dates, then do ask. I've got it recorded here. And I haven't been able to document every time from the past. I don't know how many years. The furthest I can go back is the barman of the Golden Tulip in Brea from July 2 years ago, when he distinctly remembers you picking up 2 girls in his bar that night. It apparently cost him $1,000. I watched my wife Amy of 3 years having her glory hole rendezvous with an upper-crust snob named Reginald, whom she had dated before marrying me. I was glad that I had done 2 smart things in the past. I needed to do something smart now too. However, since I was devoid of a camera, my cell phone was being repaired. I had just seen Reginald bust his car's tires and knew that Amy and I had to be at her father's house for dinner in less than an hour. I knew that by the time I got a camera, the photo op would be gone. Since Reginald's car was blocking Amy, I could cause them some pain and get a small amount of revenge while still being smart. With gloves on for all my related endeavors, I quickly unscrewed the valves on 3 of his tires, deflated them, and then restored the valves. I got a rubber mallet out of the garage and waited behind a bush. Reginald came hurrying out of the house a few minutes later. As he swore and knelt by his right front tire, I hit him on the head with the rubber mallet. I didn't hit him hard enough to kill him, but hard enough to knock him out. I removed the car keys from Reginald's pocket, and threw them as far into the woods next to our house as I could. Since I was a center fielder in high school and college, the keys went far enough never to be found. I removed the credit cards, driver's license, and cash from his wallet. You would think that a rich snob would carry more than $28 in cash, wouldn't you? Then I wiped off the small amount of hair tissue and blood from his mouth with a cloth soaked in bleach, returned the mallet to the garage, and put the cloth in a plastic bag. The credit cards and license joined the rag in the bag. With the plastic bag in hand, I ran to my car, which was several hundred yards away so that Reginald couldn't have seen it, and drove toward dear old daddy-in-law's house at a high rate of speed. One of the few operating payphones left in America was at a 7-Eleven on my way. I parked at the next store over, removed my suit jacket, put on a nondescript baseball cap, sweatshirt and mirrored sunglasses, and then walked toward the phone. I gave a teenage girl strolling out of the store Reginald's $28 to call 911 and anonymously report a person lying on the driveway at 15-Way Terrace. I threw the plastic bag with the rag, credit cards and license into the dumpster at the 7-Eleven. I then drove to Daddy Dearest's house, arriving 10 minutes early. As you can already tell, I didn't really like Daddy Dearest. He liked me, sort of, but only because I was the best producer at the big insurance firm that he owned. He liked the money that I made him. Daddy Dearest, whose name is Chester Grimes, was and is a rich, pompous scumsucker who has always thought that Amy was too good to marry a guy from a middle-class family like me, Blake Bristol. In reality, if one based it on morality rather than money, I was too good for Amy and Chester. Chester valued promptness, so I called Amy on Chester's landline to find out why she wasn't there at the appointed time. She was harried and distraught when she answered the phone. "Hi Amy, where are you? Your dad is getting a little cross." "Oh well, I'm sorry I'm late. There was a crime in front of our house and the police are here." "Yes, officer, this is my husband Blake." "No, you don't need to talk to him, do you?" I heard some arguing in the background, and obviously Amy had placed her hand over the mouthpiece. I heard the noise of the phone changing hands. "This is Detective Burns. Is this Blake Bristol?" "Yes, it is, officer." "What happened? Is my wife all right?" "Yes, Mr. Bristol, physically she's fine. However, a man named Reginald Swift was attacked on your driveway and was taken away by ambulance. His car is just now being towed." "What the hell was Reginald Swift doing in my house?" I screamed with indignation loud enough to ensure that the ever-proper Chester Grimes was sure to hear. "Your wife hasn't really explained that to us. Perhaps you have some information about it." "What the hell? He's an ex-boyfriend of hers. Maybe he just stopped by for a quickie. How the hell should I know? I hope that he got the hell kicked out of him." "No need to get vulgar, Mr. Bristol. Then you know nothing about why he might have been at your house or who attacked him?" "No, but when you find the guy, tell him I'd like to buy him a beer." "Can you take my wife to the hospital and get a vaginal swab to prove that Swift's DNA is in her vagina?" "Not unless she's willing to go," Burns answered. "What if it was a sexual assault and she's too afraid to tell you? Can't you make her go under those circumstances?" I feverishly asked. "Unless she says she's been sexually assaulted, I'm sorry but I can't," Burns replied. "Will you at least take detailed photos of her to show whether there was an attack on her, such as bruising or bleeding?" I pleaded. "Yes, we can do that," Burns replied. "Thanks. Can you put the potential crime victim, Amy, back on the phone?" "Detective Burns, yes. Although I'd like to talk to you some more tomorrow. By then I'll have my cell phone back. Call me then to set up an appointment, and I'll come to see you," I told him and then gave him my cell phone number. "Hello Blake, honey," Amy started to say. "Cut the crap, Amy. I want you to go to the hospital immediately and have Detective Burns drive you to get a vaginal swab to see if Reginald assaulted you." No, where did you get that idea, Blake?" "Well, then go to prove to me that you didn't have sex with him. How can you accuse me of cheating at a time like this?" Amy started to cry. "A time like what? So the a-hole got assaulted. I don't give a damn about him, and you shouldn't either," I yelled, then paused for dramatic effect before continuing. "Let's put it this way, sweetheart, you either get a vaginal swab while the police witness it before you clean yourself up, or I'm filing for divorce." "Screw you," she screamed, but before she could say anything else I hung up on her. Chester was ashen and pissed. "What was that?" he bellowed. "Well, Chet," I replied. "He hated being called Chet. Your daughter has cheated on me with that a-hole Reginald Swift, so I'll be divorcing her." When Chester got over his shock, he stammered, "You can't talk to me or about my daughter like that. I should fire you." The phone rang. I knew it was Amy, so I just lifted it and then slammed it back down. "Will you put that in writing?" I excitedly asked, taking a pen and pad off the kitchen counter and handing them to him. "Even though it will rip my heart out not to make money for a pompous scumsucker like you anymore, I'll somehow survive being terminated," Chester stammered, mumbling about what a classless ingrate I was, and how he would be glad to get rid of me. He wrote, "Blake Bristol is fired as of today," put in the date and signed his name. "Thanks," I said, then walked out the door, cradling my pink slip with the ringing phone providing background music. "Okay, I know that you are a little confused by my actions and think that I might be in that case, but maybe a little more information will help clear things up. The two smart things I referred to in the first paragraph were the conditions of the prenuptial agreement I had with Amy, and the employment contract with Chester's company signed at the same time as the prenup. I had both Amy and Chester agree to add one provision to each of those contracts. I made the prenup reciprocal if either of us harmed the other or had sex with anyone else during the marriage. The penalties of the prenup would take effect. Attorney Ron Botts, told me that the circumstantial evidence gave me a good shot if we got the right judge, and that we could likely gather some more useful information during discovery. Ron also counseled me on what to do and not to do with a divorce action imminent. I was advised to avoid closing accounts, switching money or securities, canceling credit cards, etc., until we got an order from the court accounting for and freezing assets. Acting precipitously would look bad to the judge and prejudice our case. As soon as I left Chester with steam coming out of his ears, I bought a burner cell phone and called Ron's office. "Why are you still there at 7 p.m. on a Friday night?" I asked. "Serving helpless shits like you," he laughed back. "What's up?" I explained the situation to him, but only from the time I got to Chester's house. Ron had straightforward advice: don't go back home tonight. Go to a hotel, get receipts, and be seen on their security cameras. Tomorrow morning, a video camera-toting PI will accompany you back to your home and leave a recording device there. Meanwhile, I will check up on this Reginald situation. I'll initiate the divorce proceedings on Monday. I did as instructed. The next morning, Saturday, the PI and I went to my house, the scene of the Reginald incident. The PI entered through the side door and I went in through the front door. I made noise and yelled out, "Amy, I'm here to get some things, then leave." Amy quickly came down the stairs. "Where the hell do you get off accusing me of cheating and making my dad fire you, you creep? Did you get the vaginal swab?" I sarcastically asked. "Hell no," she started screaming before I cut her off. "Then we have nothing to talk about. I'll get my clothes and leave." She was so focused on berating me that I'm sure Amy didn't see the PI, but he got good photos and videos of her face and exposed skin showing no cuts or bruises. I closed and locked the bedroom door and ignored her pounding and yelling as I packed my clothes and valuables into 2 suitcases. I checked the sheets for spots, but she was smart enough to have changed them. She probably burned them or soaked them in bleach. Once packed, without a word, I walked right past her and out the front door. The PI filmed her with a telephoto lens from the car as she screamed on the outside stoop as I left. He had placed a long battery life voice-activated recorder in the kitchen while Amy and I were upstairs. "How did the photos and video come out?" I asked as we drove away. "Perfectly. It's easy to see that she had no marks on her. The placement of the voice-activated recorder turned out to be a touch of genius." Later that day, we caught her conversation with one of her friends, Lila Castle. Amy got Lila to punch her in the face and arms and put small cuts on her arms and neck. After Lila did what Amy asked, they both went to a clinic to have the cuts and bruises documented and took photos. While Amy and Lila were at the clinic, the PI and I went back to my house to remove any other items I needed and to pick up the recorder. Ron had called it perfectly. We sued for adultery on Monday. By the end of the week, Amy had countersued for physical abuse. About the time the divorce papers were being served on Amy on Monday, after I had cleaned out my office and retrieved my cell phone from the repair shop, I went to see Detective Burns. "Where were you when this Reginald Swift thing went down, Mr. Bristol?" was his first question after an exchange of pleasantries. "It sounds like you're treating me as a suspect," I said, crossing my arms. "Well, we do have evidence linking you to the scene," he continued. "Well, then you should arrest me because I'm done talking to you and want my attorney," I said forcefully. "Is that really the way you want to play it?" "You look guilty," Burns continued. "I thought that when I asked for an attorney, you couldn't ask me another question. And you just did." "Either arrest me or I'm leaving," I said. I got up and started to walk out the door. "We'll be in touch," Burns continued without bluster. "Only with my attorney," I said, handing him one of Ron's cards, then exiting. I never heard from him again, nor did Ron. I really wish that at the time the suit and the countersuit were filed, I had been aware of a conversation that Ron had with another PI, Dan Drake, who was also a friend of Ron's. My angst would have been significantly relieved, and I would have understood Ron's staunch confidence in our case. The conversation between Ron and Dan took place 2 days after the countersuit was filed. Ron related it to me only after the trial. "Dan, I don't want you to tell me any substance whatsoever of what you know, but I need answers to a question or two." "Shoot, Ron. If I can help I will," Dan replied. "Dan, does the name Amy Bristol mean anything to you?" "Yes, it does." "Do you have any clients you've worked for interested in Amy Bristol's activities?" "Yes, I do." Can you give me their names? I will check with them and get back to you. Dan called Ron the few hours later. Their names are Elizabeth Moore and Jamie Watkins. Don't tell me anything more. Will either client want you to monitor a divorce trial where Amy Bristol is a party? Okay, Ron. Yes, I'm sure that at least one of them will. I'll let you know the date. Thanks, Ron said. While that conversation was taking place, apparently I was interviewing with Chester's biggest competitor, who hired me on the spot with the same salary I was paid by Chester's company and with a commission almost twice as large. Since I had no non-compete with Chester's company, I contacted all of my old clients within a week, and within a month, almost 90% had transferred their business to my new company. I could afford Ron's and the PI's bills. Also, between the start of the divorce proceedings and the trial date, I beat Chester's company for new business more than 80% of the time when we went head-to-head. Ron had filed for a freeze of assets when he filed the divorce petition. It was granted. Neither Amy nor I was able to touch our money except for attorney fees and other litigation costs. The allowance provided by the court or as a result of a special request that the other party either agreed to or the court ordered included no cashing of CDs, canceling of credit cards, shifting of money from joint accounts to solo ones, selling of stocks, canceling insurance policies, or raiding of safe deposit boxes. The judge's assignment appeared bad, but Ron assured me that it would ultimately work to our advantage. Judge Matt Moore was presiding. He was the newest and youngest judge in family court, very vibrant, self-assured, and good-looking with a suspected prejudice against us. I had only met Matt Moore once at a 4th of July party at his next-door neighbor's house about a month before he was confirmed as a judge. I remember because Amy and I fought that night. She got drunk and disappeared on me. Moore spoke very highly of my father-in-law, Chester Grimes, and the brief conversation that Moore and I had that night. I asked Ron, why did we waive a jury trial when you suspect because of his relationship with Chester Grimes that Moore might be prejudiced against us? Ron just smiled. Who's the attorney, me or you? Don't get your panties in a bunch. I know what I'm doing. I want to get you more than the prenup calls for, he replied confidently. Ron explained the pretrial procedure to me. During discovery, we would have to disclose what we knew and would use as evidence.
The assault was alleged to have taken place on the Saturday, after the Reginald incident, when the discreet PI and I went to my house to collect my things. Ron immediately noticed Lila's deposition, before we had to respond to Amy's discovery requests. Lila's videotape deposition, which Amy and I attended though we never spoke to each other, was on a Monday. After Ron pinned Lila down on the date of the alleged attack, he asked, "So, Ms. Castle, you are absolutely positive that you witnessed the attack shortly before you accompanied Mrs. Bristol to the clinic for treatment on that Saturday, correct?" "Yes, I'm positive," she said, trying to look confident, but not quite pulling it off. "You yourself did not inflict the wounds on Mrs. Bristol, correct?" Ron continued. Lila's and Amy's jaws dropped and Amanda McAfee looked perplexed. "Of course not," Lila hesitantly replied. "I'm going to play an audio tape for you, that an independent witness will swear, was recorded that Saturday after Mr. Bristol left his house. Tell me if you recognize the voices," Ron said as he played the tape. All the faces on the other side of the table became ashen when it was done. "Do you recognize the voices? Aren't you and Mrs. Bristol talking about how to bruise her, and then lie that Mr. Bristol did it?" "You must have faked that," Ron said. "We'll have a voice expert compare your voice and your testimony today with that on the tape, and then send the matter to the DA for perjury prosecution. That's all the questions I have." Not surprisingly, Amy's attorney had no cross-examination. 2 days after Lila's deposition, Amanda McAfee moved to withdraw the countersuit, and asked the court to issue an order of reconciliation to stay the case for 2 months, while the parties sought the services of a certified reconciliation mediator. Ron vigorously opposed the motion. During oral argument he said, "Your Honor, they filed the countersuit in bad faith, and we want a chance to put that on the record during the trial since it affects Mrs. Bristol's credibility. Also, my client doesn't have the slightest interest in reconciliation, and while the case is stayed, he's losing interest on the $500,000 he's going to collect from Mrs. Bristol, showing his prejudice." Judge Moore granted Amy's motion, but did throw us a bone. If reconciliation does not work out and Mr. Bristol prevails at trial, Then Mrs. Bristol will pay 2 months' interest at 4% per annum on any money Mr. Bristol is entitled to, aside from the division of assets. Ron cautioned me to follow the instructions in the order during the reconciliation procedures, so as not to give the court a reason to sanction me. He told me not to swear, no matter how tempted. Is the word a swear word? I asked him. No, but don't use it. Call her a grossly unfaithful spouse, Ron replied with a smile. Not surprisingly, 2 days before the ordered mediation session, I got a letter from Chester Grimes. I had refused to answer his phone calls, or even to listen to his messages. The letter was very conciliatory, and offered me my old job back at twice the salary and commission. I saved it in case Ron could use it as evidence but never responded to it. No attorneys were allowed at the mediation, just the parties. Amy arrived at the mediation session dressed to kill. She was a sexy, sensuous woman, and her wardrobe, makeup and hairstyle were impeccable. If I didn't hate her, I would have been tempted to bend her over the mediator's couch and have my way with her. Since the order said nothing about dress, I arrived in cut-off jeans, sandals, and an old college t-shirt riddled with holes. Amy hated that shirt and had tried to throw it away twice. I also hadn't shaved in 2 days, and my hair was uncombed and unwashed. Amy took one look at me and knew it was over, but she tried anyway, undoubtedly motivated only by the $500,000. Mr. Bristol, I'm surprised by your appearance, the mediator said. The order said nothing about dress, and this is how I chose to appear. I'm sorry if it doesn't meet your approval, I replied, trying to avoid a sarcastic tone, but probably not succeeding. The mediator then went over the procedure while Amy and I remained silent. Even though I was the petitioner, she let Amy speak first. As the petitioner, don't I get to speak first? I asked. As the mediator, I can determine the order of discussion. She shot back, obviously still perturbed by my appearance. Amy was a great actress. She said how much she loved me and wondered why I was suspicious of her. She talked about all the great times we had together, and cried at appropriate moments for dramatic effect. She took a good half hour. Either the mediator was touched by Amy's performance or was trying to fix the proceedings, because once Amy finished, she turned to me with misty eyes and said, Mr. Bristol, what would you like to say to your dear wife, who has just bared her soul? She's not a dear wife. She is a serial cheater, has been grossly unfaithful to me, and is also a liar, as clearly evidenced by her story that I beat her. Her entire presentation was an act to save $500,000. I don't know if she ever loved me, but I don't care. I don't love her. In fact, I hate her, and I want to get a divorce as quickly as possible so I can move on with my life. The mediator and Amy were shocked. During the rest of the session, I curtly answered questions or responded to statements from both the mediator and Amy. The only more than 4-word reply I gave during the rest of the session was when tearful Amy said, You never even gave me a chance to explain about why Reginald was there before you went ballistic. I told you then, in no uncertain terms, to get a vaginal swab to prove that you didn't have sex with him, or to accuse him of sexual assault, and that if you didn't, I was divorcing you. It was your choice. Live with it. That was not well received. As a last desperate gesture, the mediator said, Mr. Bristol, I want you to stand, go over to Amy and give her a hug to see if that rekindles any feelings in you. I quickly responded. I didn't see any requirement in the order for me to hug her, and the idea of even touching my grossly unfaithful soon-to-be ex-wife makes my skin crawl. Since I don't want to lose my breakfast, I decline. Amy jumped out of her chair, started swearing at me as loudly as she could, and likely would have hit me if the mediator hadn't intervened. As the mediator was trying to calm Amy down, the big grin on my face probably didn't help the situation. The mediator said, You can go, Mr. Bristol. The mediator reported to the court that there was no hope of reconciliation, so the court dissolved the stay and discovery proceeded. During discovery, Amy's attorney took my deposition. I answered all of her questions truthfully except for 2. Did you ever actually witness Mrs. Bristol having sex with another man before the divorce petition was filed? And did you ever see Reginald Swifton at your house while you were married, and before the divorce petition was filed? I'm basically honest but not stupid. After several months of pretrial proceedings, during which Judge Moore demonstrated his bias whenever possible while still protecting the record for appeal, the trial was set for 2 months after discovery closed. Ron had not taken Amy's deposition for strategic reasons, he told me. However, he did have Amy's response to interrogatories where she swore that she never had sex with another man while married, and before the divorce petition was filed.
As we were getting our papers together to leave, a man came up to Ron with a big smile on his face. When Ron saw him, he returned the smile. I had seen the guy sitting in the courtroom during Amy's testimony, but didn't know who he was. "Blake, this is Dan Drake, a friend of mine," Ron said. I shook Drake's hand with a perplexed look on my face. "I have some information for you," Drake said, his grin even wider. "It relates to impeachment of Amy Bristol's testimony. Let's go to my office and order dinner." Ron cackled as the three of us left for Ron's office. Drake showed us one DVD in which a naked Amy brings James Watkins to climax while he screams her name. Drake mentioned that he had another DVD, but Ron stopped him from showing it to us. "I just want you to testify about the date of your second DVD if it is what I think it is, but I don't know for sure. I don't want to see it now, and I'm sure it will never be shown in court," Ron said. Promptly at 9 the next morning, Ron started his cross-examination of Amy. After questioning her about Reginald's visit on the day that I witnessed him with her, he asked, "Do you know a man named James Watkins?" "Yes," she hesitantly replied. "Is his wife Jamie Watkins?" "Yes." "When did you first meet him?" "I don't recall exactly." "Wasn't it at a party at your father's house 18 months ago, when he attended with his wife Jamie?" "Maybe. Hadn't he just moved to town and started working for your father 1 month before that?" "I guess so." "Well, was it or wasn't it? Do we need to call him or Mrs. Jamie Watkins to testify?" Ron snarled, his pleasant demeanor suddenly gone. After an uncomfortable pause, Amy stammered, "Yes, I remember now. That party about 18 months ago was when I first met him." "So you never met him before you were married, did you?" "No," Amy hesitantly replied. "Mrs. Bristol, did you ever have sex with Mr. James Watkins?" "No." "You keep accusing me of cheating," Amy whimpered, then started to cry. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a DVD at this time. Because of its nature, I ask that it be displayed only on the monitors at counsel's tables, the bench and the witness stand, not on the main courtroom monitor." "Very well, Mr. Botts." "Bailiff, please hit the right buttons to make that happen," Judge Moore said after a pause and a nod from the bailiff. When Ron pushed the play button on the DVD player, Amy screamed and then covered her mouth with her hands as she saw what appeared on the screen. "Is this video of you and Mr. Watkins having sex, Mrs. Bristol?" Ron asked after it had played for about 60 seconds.